KURV, we welcome back to the program. Sam Raus, a recent graduate of the University of Miami, Tech and Consumer Freedom Fellow with Young Voices. He's got a op-ed in the American Spectator. Google's plight, the toxic search for antitrust remedies. So apparently Google is too good at their job. We've got a love-hate relationship with Google, Davey. And Google apparently is being penalized for being too good. Is that right, Sam?
Yep.
So what's the story here? What happened?
Yeah. So over the past several months, Google has been facing antitrust litigation brought on by the now outgoing Biden administration. That it was based on the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission's allegations that Google had monopolized the search industry business. And so they brought this litigation charging Google with being a monopoly in the search engine business for its very prominent, website, Google. And the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that the FTC was correct and that Google had monopolized the search engine business. But the case hasn't settled yet. Now they are looking into remedies into this situation to determine what kind of adjustments are going to be made to the Google business. And yet all of these remedies seem completely out of place. They have very little to do with the search engine business and the allegations that was particularly around Google's exclusive business agreements with Apple to, use Google as the default search engine on all Apple products. And they've gone as far as to suggest Google break up its Chrome platform, break up its other businesses, completely alter its data operations and open that up to third-party platforms, and really have done very little to prove the original arguments of the case.
So the original argument of the case was that Google, as a search engine, they were monopolizing searching, and that in this way they were trying to shut out any other competitors that might try to become a rising star in the search engine hierarchy that exists. Is that the picture that I'm getting here?
Yeah, I think the original allegations really centered around the fact that Google continues to operate at outsized market share in the search engine business in the United States due to what is not just a very popular product, but seemingly the leading preferred product by most consumers. I think most people these days, when it comes to looking something up on the internet, Google is the kind of default selection. And so the FTC has gone as far to suggest that that is some sort of business monopolization because the consumer's choices ultimately have found the winner and chosen who they believe to be the most superior product. And they are now seeking to completely disrupt that entire business sect and that entire use of the internet.
Do you believe? Sorry, we're speaking with Sam Raus, who is a recent graduate of Miami, University of Miami, and is one of our tech experts joining us on 710 KURV. And do you think that this is one of those problems? Do you remember going back? The internet is a series of tubes that one congressman had described the internet as. Do you think that this is one of those things where the powers that be, the people that are in these crazy government offices, have no idea how the internet works, how technology works, and they're just shooting in the dark here?
I think that pretty much sums it up. What we're seeing is a solution that has been tried in other countries. In Europe, they passed a very similar legal decision that ultimately forced for companies to no longer have exclusivity agreements with Google on it for its search platforms, and has interrupted the different business flow. And yet, Google has continued to remain the superior choice of European customers. It altered very little market behavior, which is ultimately what you're looking at when it comes to determining monopolization. And I think this is all because there's so little attention paid to the fact that the search engine use case of Google's platform, and Google is a very large company, is, yes, largely a dominant and centralized firm at this point, but is being quickly outpaced by the amount of search uses on social media platforms. I think now almost all of them offer an in-app search feature that is very similar to a Google search engine, as well as the evolution of AI and how often people are now turning to AI platforms such as ChatGPT to do their initial searches because of the level of integration and analysis that it can quickly synthesize in comparison with doing a general browser search. So the markets are moving so quickly and the country is shifting so fast, and yet the lawmakers are still thinking about how the internet was a decade or so ago and trying to legislate, and the courts are now trying to determine a remedy based off of the situation then instead of looking at now and the future.
I can imagine there's got to be at least one guy in the room who's like, what's a Google? And just wondering all this stuff. Because it seems kind of ludicrous, right? This whole thing is over how well Google performs as a search engine, and they wanted them to sell off Google Chrome. And you would think, like, common sense would say, okay, well, if this is an antitrust case, and if they are sticking their hand out and arm barring other people from competing on a fair level, the browser would have nothing to do with it. Just correct the behavior and let's move on and put all this behind us. But they seem to, I don't know if it's like a beef with Google because of them abandoning the whole "don't be evil" motto or what, but they seem very intent on dissecting everything that was Google.
Yeah, and I think what this, very broad, sweeping remedy attempt really shows is how much, under the current administration, under outgoing Chairwoman Lena Khan's administration at the FTC, antitrust and our law enforcement of businesses has really shifted from enforcing the existing law and resolving true problems to this big sweeping demonization of businesses. Her antitrust philosophy is weighed so much into anything as big is bad, rather than looking at the consumer's behavior, their own welfare, and seeing the market as it is.
Yeah, it's like if McDonald's got too big and they said, you know what, you're edging out too much of the competition. You cannot sell the chicken McNugget anymore, or the Big Mac anymore. Or if you went to a Starbucks, you couldn't sell the caramel macchiato anymore because you guys are getting too big. You have to find some way to stick the stick inside of the spokes of your bicycle there.
Yeah, I think what's absolutely fascinating is there was no evidence in this case that Google was engaging in any kind of nefarious or unlawful activity by continuing to grow its business and making exclusivity agreements with Apple and other platforms to prioritize its service. I mean, this is no different than any other kind of brand partnerships that may, have default apps added to the platform, or, offering your merchandise in my store. And yet the assumption that just because Google's share of the market is so large at this point, that it must be fundamentally harming the consumers and harming competition, when we're seeing so much competition rise so quickly with AI and social media, and the consumers seem to be fairly content with the existing platforms that they have.
I got about a minute here, Sam. What do you think that lawmakers should do, and the powers that be, I guess, in the future for dealing with a lot of these tech stories? Because it really feels like they're lagging 10, 15, 20 years behind in grasping some of these concepts moving forward.
I think one of the biggest takeaways from this case is showing that lawmakers and legal agencies cannot move fast enough to address market conditions, but what they can do is set in place laws that remain constant regardless of changing markets and technology, that enforce protections for consumers and protections for our general welfare. And so enforcing those existing laws, rather than endlessly expanding the government into all these new sectors and creating new rules that we think may change current situation, it shows that there's a lot of need for deregulation at this point.
Hey, thanks a lot, Sam, for spending some time with us this afternoon. Appreciate it. That's Sam Raus, a recent graduate of the University of Miami, Tech and Consumer Freedom Fellow with Young Voices, joining us on News Talk 710 KURV.